Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something we hear about all the time, but rarely really understand: food deserts.
Yeah, it's one of those things that sounds simple enough at first glance.
Right, like, oh, there's no grocery stores nearby, so people can't get healthy food.
Exactly, but the reality is way more complicated.
And to really get into it, we're going to look at this fascinating study from the University of Maryland. They focused on East Baltimore.
A neighborhood with some pretty stark realities.
Yeah, over 90% of the population is black, and a lot of folks are living on less than $15,000 a year. There are also really high rates of diet-related diseases.
And on top of that, back in the early 2000s, the area saw a 15% decrease in the number of grocery stores.
So you look at that and you think classic food desert, right?
Seems like it. But here's where it gets interesting. The study specifically looked at the experiences of low-income African-American single mothers.
Think about the challenges they're already facing, raising a family on a tight budget, and then you add in limited access to healthy food options.
It's a lot to navigate.
Now, the study did have some limitations. It didn't compare prices across different stores or analyze the nutritional content of what was available.
Right, but that's kind of what makes it so compelling. Despite living in what we'd call a food desert, the women they interviewed didn't necessarily feel like their food choices were severely limited.
That was a huge surprise. What's going on here? If it's not just about a lack of grocery stores, then how are these women making it work?
That's the million-dollar question. And this study revealed some seriously clever coping mechanisms that really challenge our assumptions about food deserts.
Okay, spill the beans. Like, how are they even getting to the grocery store if transportation's an issue? I'd assume the bus would be the main option.
You'd think so, right? But
Yeah.
actually, the study found that bus fare was often too expensive, especially when you factor in multiple trips with kids and groceries.
Ah, yeah, that makes sense. So no bus? What are they doing walking miles with bags of groceries?
Some did, but a lot of them relied on a system that's both fascinating and kind of under the radar. It's called hacks, what you might call jitney drivers in other cities.
Wait, so not official cabs. How safe is that?
That was a concern, but the study found that the women felt comfortable using hacks. Some grocery stores even partnered with the drivers, giving them store-branded shirts for legitimacy and safety.
Wow, so they basically created their own transportation system.
That's incredible. It shows how communities can come up with solutions when formal systems aren't meeting their needs.
It's about adaptation and resourcefulness.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this goes way beyond just counting grocery stores on a map. But what about the actual shopping experience? I imagine finding affordable, healthy options is still a struggle.
For sure. But here again, these women demonstrated a level of savvy that breaks down stereotypes. The study found that distance wasn't the only thing influencing their store choices.
Really? What else were they considering?
Quality sales and even whether stores accepted double coupons.
So they weren't just going to whatever was closest. They were making strategic decisions.
One woman even talked about how she'd carefully plan her trips, making lists based on advertised sales the night before. She called it making market. Wow, that's next level planning. It really challenges this idea that people in these areas just lack knowledge about healthy eating or budgeting.
Exactly. They're making informed choices within a system that's often working against them.
And that brings us to another big piece of this puzzle community and how social networks play such a vital role.
Right. It's not just about transportation, but about shaping food access in a much broader sense.
So like family and friends helping out with rides to stores further away.
Absolutely. Especially for those bigger shopping trips. It was a group effort.
You know, all this makes me wonder if food desert is even the right term anymore. Maybe we need to redefine what food access really means and take into account these informal systems and social connections.
I think you're onto something there. And that's what's so valuable about this study. It forces us to look beyond just the physical distance to grocery stores and recognize all the different factors that influence people's food choices.
We're talking social, economic, and cultural contexts that all play a part.
It's complex. And that complexity is key to understanding the real challenges of food insecurity.
This is fascinating stuff, but it also raises a lot of questions about the implications of these adaptations. Are they sustainable in the long run? Are there downsides to relying on these informal networks? That's what we'll be diving into in part 2.
Stay tuned because we're just getting started. Welcome back. So before we jump in, let's circle back to this idea of adaptation that we were talking about.
Right, how the women in the study didn't necessarily see themselves as being, victims of a food desert, even though objectively their neighborhood kind of fit the description.
And that's what's so interesting. On the one hand, It's incredibly inspiring to see how resourceful and resilient they are. They've created these systems that work for them in spite of the limitations.
But then there's that other side of it, right?
Hmm.
Like, is this adaptation maybe a little bit of a double-edged sword?
I think so. It's almost like they've gotten so good at navigating this broken system that it masks the underlying issues.
Like, if people are coping, we might assume everything's fine, when in reality they're still facing huge obstacles to getting healthy, affordable food.
Exactly. And it's easy to fall into that trap of praising people for jumping through hoops that shouldn't even be there in the first place.
Yeah, like we're celebrating their resilience without actually addressing the systemic problems that force them to be resilient.
Right. And that's where the conversation needs to go deeper. It's not about blaming individuals, it's about understanding the bigger picture.
So let's talk about that bigger picture. What are some of the hidden costs of these coping mechanisms? We talked about hacks as a creative solution for transportation, but is that really a sustainable long-term answer?
Well, it's definitely a mixed bag. While hacks provide flexibility and they can be more convenient than the bus, they're not always reliable. And affordability can be an issue too.
Plus, I imagine there's a sense of obligation and dependency that comes with relying on these informal networks.
Absolutely. It's like you're constantly in someone's debt, which can be emotionally draining.
And it limits your choices too,
Yeah.
right? If you're relying on a family member for a ride, you might end up going to the store they prefer, even if it's not the most affordable or has the best selection for you.
Exactly. It takes away that sense of agency and control.
So it's about more than just physical access to food. It's about having the power to make your own decisions.
And that's what we need to focus on, shifting the conversation away from individual solutions to addressing the systemic issues.
Okay, so let's talk solutions. What are some concrete things we can do to create a more equitable food system, not just in East Baltimore, but everywhere?
Well, for starters, we need to let go of this idea that just adding more grocery stores to underserved areas will solve everything.
Right, it's not that simple. It's about affordability quality, the overall shopping experience.
And one approach that's shown a lot of promise is investing in community-based food initiatives.
Those programs that empower residents to take charge of their own food choices.
Exactly. Things like farmers markets that accept SNAP benefits, so low-income families can buy fresh produce, or community gardens where people can grow their own food.
I love that. It addresses the economic side of things and the accessibility issue all at once. Plus, it builds community.
It's about giving people the tools and knowledge they need to make healthy choices.
And we can't forget about advocating for policies that make healthy food more affordable and accessible for everyone, right?
Absolutely. We need to be pushing for things like tax incentives for grocery stores to open in underserved areas, expanding food assistance programs, maybe even considering price controls on essential food items.
All good ideas. But policy change takes time. What can we do in the meantime on an individual level to make a difference?
There's actually a lot we can do. Supporting local businesses that prioritize ethical sourcing and fair labor practices is a big one.
So like voting with our dollars.
Exactly. Volunteering at food banks or community gardens is another great way to get involved.
And of course, just educating ourselves and spreading the word about these issues is crucial.
Right. It's about challenging those oversimplified narratives about food deserts and really understanding the lived experiences of people who are navigating these challenges every day.
We need to advocate for solutions that get to the root of the problem, not just the symptoms.
Absolutely. And as we head into the final part of our deep dive, we'll be exploring some more specific actions you can take to create a more just and delicious world.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time unpacking this whole food desert thing and how it doesn't really capture the whole picture when it comes to food access.
It's way more than just grocery stores being absent. We have to look at all the things that make it hard for people to get healthy food, even if those stores are technically there.
Right. We saw how those women in the study were coming up with all these amazing workarounds, using hacks for transportation, getting super strategic with their shopping, and relying on their social networks.
But we also talked about how those adaptations can have downsides and might even make things less fair in some ways.
Which brings us to the big question. What can we actually do to make a food system that works for everyone?
It's a huge question, and it can feel kind of overwhelming.
Like, where do we even begin?
Well, I think a good place to start is with the change in how we see things. We need to move away from this fix the people mentality and focus more on fixing the systems that are causing these problems.
So less about individual responsibility and more about working together to change the system.
Exactly. And that means going beyond just adding more grocery stores to certain neighborhoods. It's about tackling those bigger issues like poverty and lack of transportation, and not enough good-paying jobs.
Those are big issues for sure. What about some more immediate things we can do to make a difference right now?
One really promising area is community-based food initiatives.
Those programs that give people more control over their food choices, right?
Yeah, exactly. Think about things like farmers markets that accept SNAP benefits, so low-income families can get fresh produce, or community gardens where people can grow their own food.
I love those ideas. It's about providing access and knowledge, not just handing out food.
Yeah.
It gives people a sense of ownership.
And there are also programs that teach people how to cook healthy meals on a tight budget, so it's addressing that knowledge gap, too.
It's like a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
We need policy changes and on-the-ground action. We have to address both the practical things and the education piece.
Exactly. It's about building a whole network of support that tackles the issue from different angles.
This is all really encouraging, but I imagine it takes a lot of people working together to make it happen. So who are the key players in creating this change?
It really does take a team effort. We need policymakers who are committed to food justice and community organizations that are really connected to the people they serve. And of course, we need individuals who are willing to speak up and push for change.
What about businesses? What role do they play in all of this?
Businesses, especially those in the food industry, have a big responsibility to make sure their practices are ethical and sustainable. That means sourcing their ingredients responsibly, paying fair wages, and supporting initiatives that address food insecurity in their communities.
So it's about holding them accountable and encouraging them to be part of the solution.
Exactly. And consumers have a lot of power, too. By choosing to support businesses that share our values, we can send a message and encourage positive change.
It's about being mindful about where we spend our money.
Every dollar we spend is a vote for the kind of world we want.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've busted some myths about food deserts, talked about all the different things that affect food access, and explored some potential solutions, both big and small. If there's one thing you want listeners to take away from all of this, what would it be?
I think the most important thing to remember is this. Food isn't just something we buy. It's a basic human right. And making sure everyone has access to healthy, affordable food isn't just charity, it's justice.
It's about recognizing the worth of every person and building a system that lets everyone thrive.
The challenges are complex, but I'm hopeful that if we work together, we can create a future where food brings people together and nourishes them instead of being a source of hardship and division.
That's a powerful vision, and I think it's one we can all get behind. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of food access. We hope you learned something new and are feeling inspired to take action.
Keep asking questions, keep learning, and keep working towards a world that's more just and more delicious.
And until next time, keep diving deep.